Okay, AMP1 students, in this video we are going to focus on the glial cells, and they're also called neuroglia cells. So these are the other cells besides neurons that make up the nervous tissue. So we're going to do what we did with neurons. We're going to talk about the characteristics of glial cells and kind of compare and contrast them to neurons. I kind of highlighted the things that you should know about glial cells. So they are smaller than neurons, and if you remember, I pulled this up from lab. So this was a picture of the nervous tissue, and so this, how you kind of mainly knew this was nervous tissue is because you have this like very, very large cell that has all these processes coming off of it. So that's a neuron. And then these little dark spots that you see, those are the nuclei of glial cells. So you can see that there's one neuron in this picture, and then there's quite a few glial cells. So the glial cells outnumber the neurons, definitely. So there's always more glial cells than neurons in our nervous tissue. All right, so let me get back to our textbook. Okay, so they're smaller than neurons. They outnumber the neurons, which is down here. They do have mitotic ability, so they are able to undergo mitosis and produce new glial cells. So that's different than the neurons, which are amitotic, which can't undergo mitosis. They do not transmit nerve impulses or action potentials. What their job is to just assist the neurons with their function. So they help to physically protect them, nourish them, so kind of make sure that they get plenty of the nutrients they need to function properly. They also, there's so many of them, they kind of help keep all of the neurons in the right place within the nervous tissue, so that way we can have normal synapses, normal communication with neurons. So they have quite a few functions, and we're going to talk about the 6 different types of glial cells, and we will go into like specifically what their individual functions are. So this is kind of the general functions of them. All right, so we're going to slide down to the types of glial cells. So they are in the central nervous system and they are in the peripheral nervous system. So there is 4 in the central nervous system, and you need to know which 4 are part of the central nervous system. And so that's what we'll talk about first, and we're going to use this picture here to talk about that. So what they did was they took, here's our brain. So we had like a frontal or coronal section, plane of the brain. And so we're just going to look at some of this brain tissue. It's actually near a ventricle. That little blue is showing a ventricle. So here's our brain tissue. We just kind of enlarged it, and we're looking at a diagram actually of the brain tissue. And then here's the ventricle, because some of our glial cells are going to be lining the ventricle. So we have to have a little bit of the ventricle in there. Okay, so we have the first one in the central nervous system, glial cell, is called an astrocyte. So the astrocytes are these, in this picture, these green cells, and they have these processes, and it's almost like they have little feet. You can see like the little processes coming off and widening. Kind of makes me think of feet. So that's an astrocyte, and what the feet are wrapping around is this blood vessel. So there's a blood vessel running through the nervous tissue along with neurons. This is a neuron here, cell body, dendrites, and then we have the axon, and then here's another neuron with the dendrites and then the axon. So you'll see this astrocyte is wrapping itself around, little feet are anyway, around this blood cell, and then also the little feet are going over and like kind of grabbing hold of the neuron too. So that astrocyte, one of its functions is to kind of provide the support and organization to the nervous tissue. So it's kind of keeping neurons next to blood supply, because they're going to need nutrients from this blood here. So kind of keeping them in the proper position. And also the little foot processes that are surrounding the blood vessel, they are providing a little bit of a barrier. So certain things in the blood can't get out around the neurons, but certain things can. So we'll talk more detail when we get to the brain chapter about the blood-brain barrier. But that's one of the roles of the astrocytes, is to help form that blood-brain barrier, to kind of help regulate what can actually get to the neurons, because there's some things that could get to the neurons that could harm them. So we want to be a little extra careful with that. So we have astrocytes in our nervous tissue to do that. And then there are other functions, but those are kind of the two big ones, helping form the blood-brain barrier and providing the structural support too. All right, so those are astrocytes. And then the next cell are called ependymal cells. And those cells are located here. And so they're the ones that line the ventricle. And the ventricles of the brain, remember, are those open spaces inside the brain that have cerebrospinal fluid in them. So the role of the ependymal cells is to help produce the cerebrospinal fluid, because we continually produce new cerebrospinal fluid and the old gets drained and then we produce more. So the ependymal cells help produce the cerebrospinal fluid. And they also help to circulate it. They have like little cilia on their surface, and they kind of wave, move in a wave-like pattern, and that will help to keep that cerebrospinal fluid flowing throughout the ventricles. So that is our ependymal cells. That's our second type of glial cell. And then I'm going to go down here, and then I'll have to slide back up. Microglia cell is the third type of glial cell that's in the CNS. It's called microglia. So we're going to slide back so you can see the picture. So these are a little bit smaller cells than the others. So there's one up there, one over there. Their role in the nervous system is protection. So what they're going to do is they can actually engulf foreign material, whether it's like, a pathogen, like some sort of disease-causing organism, or maybe some damage. If we have some damage in there and there's some cell debris, they will take care of it too. So we call them, we haven't used this term before, but we call them phagocytic. So that just means that they take things in by endocytosis, which we've talked about, and they take up in large particles like bacteria and cell debris. So they are kind of the white. I can usually sometimes call them the white blood cells of the nervous system, because they're there to take care of any sort of infectious organisms like bacteria. So that's our microglia cell. That's the third type in the CNS. And then the fourth type are called oligodendrocytes, and you have to know that one for lab too, oligodendrocytes, and we'll slide down here so you can see them. So you'll notice that the oligodendrocytes, there's like 4 of them here, they have these like little processes that will extend off of their cell body and then wrap around the axon of adjacent neurons. So what these little things that are wrapping around the axon are called are myelin sheaths. So that's the myelin sheath in the CNS, and it's formed by an oligodendrocyte. So that is the function of the oligodendrocytes, is to myelinate and insulate. That's kind of why what the function of myelin is to insulate those axons that are in the central nervous system. And then this kind of tells you why we want it insulated or have myelin around it. That way our nerve impulses or action potentials can be conducted really quickly down the axon very fast. So, all right, so those are our 4 glial cells that make up the central nervous system. So astrocytes, you should know their functions. Ependymal cells know their functions. Microglia know their functions, and oligodendrocytes too. Okay, so I think we have time in this video to slide down and talk about the glial cells of the peripheral nervous system. So there's only 2, and they are called satellite cells. And then neurolemocytes, which these we had to learn in lab. I always learn them as Schwann cells, SCHWANN. But neurolemocyte is what this book uses, so either one will work. So what you should know, this is in the peripheral nervous system. So these are going to be surrounding the structures that are associated with the nerves, like the ganglion and the nerves. All right, so the satellite cells, they kind of work similar to the astrocytes in the CNS. So they're just helping to regulate. Here's a little, let me do the neuron first. Here's a little cell body of a neuron. And then we have the axons that you can see running through there. And then there's other cell bodies around here too. But they're surrounded by, each one of those little cells is a satellite cell. And so what they're doing is they're kind of insulating those, but they're also kind of controlling what things can get, kind of serving as a barrier, what things can get to that cell body of that neuron. So they're just helping regulate any nutrients, any waste products around those cell bodies of those neurons. So those are satellite cells. And then the neurolemocytes or Schwann cells, you can see the little neurolemocytes here, or Schwann cells. But what they do the same thing that the oligodendrocytes do in the CNS. They're going to form a myelin sheath so that we have more rapid, faster action potentials going down the axon. So that's what they are doing. Now they do it a little bit differently than the oligodendrocytes, because the oligodendrocyte has processes, so we can form a myelin sheath around, it can form like 4 different myelin sheaths around different parts of the axons in the CNS. Whereas the neurolemocytes or Schwann cells, they actually just form one myelin sheath. They don't have any processes. They just wrap their little bodies completely around a certain section of the axon. So each one of these is a neurolemocyte or Schwann cell. So they can only form one myelin sheath, whereas the oligodendrocytes in the CNS can form like more than one. All right, so those are our glial cells. So we will finish this video up, and then we'll talk about a little bit more detail about how myelination happens, and then some disorders that can happen with our glial.